The other night, a couple of my friends and I were talking about that TikTok trend where people share their icks about getting proposed to. It's called the knee proposal ick. And it's basically people talking about the posture they'd want the man to be in as he kneels, gets down on one knee, and pops the question. But it's not only about the posture, it's also about the stance. It can't be a deep lunge or too far back. It's got to be 90-90. And you got to have your shoulders back and chin up. And to be honest, it's pretty harsh. And I'm sure for two people in love, it doesn't even matter. It's supposed to be such an emotional and vulnerable moment, but unfortunately, it just makes for such a good dinner time topic. And so the other night, I brought it up with my friends, and everyone had an opinion about it. We were all literally getting down on one knee on my floor and proposing to each other and showing people what we expect and what the posture needs to be like, how much practice it requires. But this whole thing sparked a debate when one of my friends questioned whether the man needs to kneel at all. And suddenly the whole room was divided. One side felt that if a proposal is the start of a commitment, the start of a life together, that why should it start with one person kneeling and showing that they're less than, especially if two people are valued equally? The argument was that the action of kneeling itself is humiliating. And the other side was making the argument that a man and a woman are in fact not equal, that in a relationship or marriage, they both play to their strengths and therefore have very, very different roles. And for the man, that role looks like being a provider or a protector. And so for that same provider and protector to be getting down and kneeling on one knee, which is a symbolically vulnerable position, for him to be doing that, it makes a proposal significant. And it also shows humility. And it's funny because the first argument is about humiliation, about how getting down on one knee is so humiliating and we're past that and we're equals and we don't need to do that. Whereas the second argument is an acknowledgement of the fact that we are not equal. But for one of us to get down on one knee and be vulnerable, that shows humility. And so humiliation and humility, they are such opposite words, and yet they sound very similar. Humiliation describes feeling embarrassed. It describes being disgraced or degraded. It's an attack on your dignity. It's an attack on your self-respect. And it's such a deeply negative thing, and it's cruel. And on the other hand, humility is a virtue. It's about being modest. It's about being humble. It's about releasing your pride. And so this episode is about the difference of what we think of as humiliation and humility. And that reminds me of when Oprah was interviewing Meghan Markle, and she was like, were you silenced or silent? No. She was like, were you silent or silenced? And that is a great meme and also a great quote. But anyways, this episode is about exploring that difference of humiliation and humility. And that difference is ego. Your ego is what makes you think that something is disrespectful to you. Without your ego, your personal identity cannot be tied to something physical, especially a body contortion like kneeling, which is effectively a form of a lunge. Why should a lunge be so destructive to your personal identity? Why is a lunge a personal attack on your identity? It's only because of ego. In the culture that I grew up in, called Sikhism, there was a core value of equality. And it was symbolized in so many different ways. And one of them was every time we eat, we all sit on the floor together to symbolize that no one is above one another. There's no one else sitting on a table, on a chair. We're all sitting on the floor. And you see this when you go to Sikh temples. But another example was this notion that you do not bow to somebody else, because no person should be valued more than another. No person should be idolized or perceived as higher than. Everyone is equal. But there's one exception to this rule, and that is inside a Sikh temple in front of the Guru Granth Sahib. The Guru Granth Sahib is a book of religious text and an encapsulation of religious values, spirituality, and it's this representation of a higher power. And the belief is that you bow here to show humility in an act of submission. So you're submitting yourself to this higher power. But beyond this exception, bowing is not something that you're supposed to do. And I was taught this from a very young age. And it's not even something that I realized stuck with me until I questioned it much, much later. And a lot of that questioning happened when I made friends with people from other cultures. And in a lot of cultures, bowing is very common, and it's a sign of respect. In Hinduism, for example, bowing is common. You do it to your elders, you do it as a greeting, you do it to your parents, grandparents, relatives, or anyone older that you respect. And the way that they bow is by touching the elder person's feet. And so the younger person bows, touches the foot of the other person. The older person just like pats their head and they get up. And that's basically a greeting, and it's very common. But not something that I had experienced before, but maybe I'd seen it on TV and stuff. But anyways, I had this friend who grew up Hindu, and I invited him over to my house to hang out. And this is back when I lived with my parents. So he comes over, and to greet my parents, he touches their feet. And almost immediately, my jaw dropped. And I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? Stand up. And it's so funny because to him, it was like, oh, these are Harpriya's parents, and I want to show them I respect them. And so I'm touching their feet to communicate that. Whereas to me, I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? You are not beneath anybody. Please respect yourself. And the same action had such opposing thoughts, such opposing reactions. One was about delivering respect, and the other was keep that respect to yourself. But bowing is also common in other cultures, like Japan. People usually bow standing up to greet everyone. And it's not just elders, it's strangers. And so I remember when I visited Japan as a tourist, I was getting bowed to, and I thought it was so weird, but also something that I kind of knew to expect through TV, social media, but I didn't expect it to be like to strangers, to people that are clearly not Japanese or part of the culture in any way. But I remember feeling weird, but it was more fun than anything. But the whole bowing thing did get to me eventually, and I did start to question it a lot more. And this happened when I was living in a Buddhist monastery for a little bit, about this time last year. So I was invited to live there and participate in every aspect of the temple, from the 5 a.m. rituals to the chanting to working there. It was an exchange of service. So in exchange to live there, I had to work there and fully immerse myself into the experience, which I was really excited to do. And this was something that I'd wanted to do for a really long time. And so part of immersing yourself meant that you spend a lot of time doing physical labor, like cleaning toilets and scrubbing the floor or chopping carrots, many, many, many of them, and also being on a vegan diet. It was all very immersive, but the part I struggled most with was right after the morning ritual. And it's not because it happened at 5 in the morning. It was more about what was going on. So after the morning meditation at 5, we all would go into a room where there's this big Buddha statue. You sit on the floor and you face it. So first, there was chanting. And this is a Zen Buddhist temple, which meant that all of the words were in Japanese. And these words would be chanted on a beat, just super synchronized with all of the monks. Maybe it's because of the synchronicity or the fact that this is a language that I couldn't speak, I didn't understand, that it felt almost culty. I felt like I was definitely intruding on something and that I shouldn't be there. And then it gets worse because after the chanting, there was bowing. Like one after another, just synchronized to the beat again. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. There was one beat to start kneeling, another to touch your forehead to the ground, and then another to stand back up again. And you just did that over and over and over again. And now imagine being a guest resident at this temple. All you're trying to do is make the most out of this experience. And so you are trying to be open-minded about everything, sit with everyone, but also not try to stick out too much like a sore thumb, and just observe, but also participate. And all of a sudden, everyone starts chanting in Japanese. And then starts bowing together, like without warning. You've been given no warning that any of this was going to happen. So now you're like, okay, let me keep going. Let me try this out. And so you do a bow and then you do another one. And then you do another and another. And now your quads are burning because at this point, you've done so many bows and you've lost count, but it was at least 30. And it's kind of like burpees at 5 in the morning. Oh, also, and you have no idea when it's going to stop. And for more context, while I don't know the exact number of bows we had to do every day, I can compare that to a Korean Zen temple where they do 108 bows as part of their ritual. But this was not a Korean Zen temple. This was a Japanese one. So I don't know how many bows they did, but that's a reference point. But anyways, I did the bows. I did it day after day after day, and it felt so weird. Why did I have to bow so much, especially to a statue? In my culture, not only do you not bow to anyone, but you also don't idolize inanimate objects the same way you don't idolize people. It's the same thing about equality. If everyone is equal, there doesn't need to be this grand display of submission. And so I felt weird. It felt humiliating. And it wasn't only during the morning chants. It was also when you walked up to the stairs to the bedroom. Because every time you walk up the stairs, you pass by this statue of the founder of the temple. And as you're walking up, you pause. You face a temple, you do a bow, slowly get up, and then continue. And you do this every time you walk up or down the stairs, which is a lot, especially if you live and work there. But you also bow before you start any activity like work or cleaning or eating or approaching people in a conversation. There's this notion of bowing in and then bowing out. That's how you acknowledge people. That's how you get others to acknowledge you. It's all within the bow. And so you have to do it a lot. And I don't think I got over that feeling of humiliation, that feeling of, I don't think I should be here. I don't belong. I don't want to do that. While I did it, I didn't get over that feeling until the very end. And I remember that exact moment of giving in entirely. It was during one of the morning sessions. It was after the chanting. And one of the first time that I didn't have that internal monologue of, I don't want to do this is embarrassing, this is humiliating. I let that go. And I gave into the act of bowing. And it felt like it was a gift that I could give, that I was lucky to give. And I finally released my ego. And now there was no part my ego could play in convincing me that I had to protect my self-respect, that I couldn't bow because my self-respect no longer depended on my ability to stand upright. And it was only until I gave myself permission to release humiliation that I felt humility. So when it comes to bowing or touching feet or proposing to someone and kneeling, some food for thought here is that maybe when it comes to doing something that you think is humiliating or a symbol of humiliation, maybe it's worth doing it anyway so that you can finally release your ego and yourself to feel humility instead. But just food for thought.